Welcome to Joy in the Breakthrough, a podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds. These leaders have found power in being broken open. I'm Connie Lindsey.
And I'm Anna Valencia. We are your hosts, and we believe that our challenges can lead to breakthroughs, and we want to share those insights with you.
We hope these stories will inspire you to explore the I'm possible in you.
I'm so excited today as we end our first season.
Yes.
We are really honored to have a very special guest with us today. Reshma Saujani is someone I have admired from afar, and she has agreed to join us on our final podcast episode. And I just want to share how this came to be. I had a big failure moment, and Reshma will talk about big failure today. Last year, almost a year ago, actually on Wednesday, I ran for Secretary of State. And you know this, Connie. I would have been the first woman of color, and I put my whole heart and soul in it for 18 months with a 9-month-old. And when I lost, I felt so much disappointment and failure. And a friend of mine recommended Reshma's book, Brave, Not Perfect. So I took this on the airplane. I went way across the other side of the world to get away. And I highlighted it and I underlined it. It brought me back to life. And what I love about it is Reshma, like myself, ran for office twice, lost twice, and like God does, pivots you to a whole other journey that has brought her so much joy and has been doing so much good in service in other places. So I'm so excited to invite Reshma on here. A friend of mine made an introduction last August. She took time out of her busy schedule to do a Zoom with me and encouraged me to get back in that arena. And then when we decided to manifest this podcast, we decided who we were going to ask for guests. And I was nervous to email her. And she talks about this in her book about taking big risks. And I took that big risk, and she said yes. And so here we are today, and we're just so thrilled you're able to Zoom in with us from New York City and make the time. I'm going to bounce it over to my co-host, Connie, to start the conversation.
I'll add my thank you and welcome to you, Reshma, and thank you again for joining us. I have read and listened to so much of the amazing work that you've done, but for those who don't know of you, and they'll certainly want to know more after this conversation, could you just tell us who is Reshma and what makes you who you are?
I mean, first and foremost, I'm a mother. I'm a dog mom. I have a 3-year-old and 8-year-old and a 13-year-old dog, a bulldog named Stanley. I'm the daughter of refugees. My parents came to this country in 1973. They were expelled from Uganda, and they came to Chicago, Illinois, in January of 73, wearing shorts and T-shirts because no one had told them about snow. And they built a life for themselves. And even though both my parents were trained engineers. My father worked as a machinist in a plant. My mother sold cosmetics. And my dad would always read to me these little Reader's Digest books about change makers. So I knew from the time I was a very little girl that I wanted to make a difference, that I wanted to make the world a better place, that I wanted to give back to the nation that had literally saved my parents' life. I went to University of Illinois, Urbana, and then got my master's in public policy at the Kennedy School and went to law school at Yale. I graduated $300,000 in student loan debt. So I moved to New York City thinking I'd pay off those loans in a year or two, and that turned into 10. And I found myself in a corporate job that I hated, in a life I didn't want. And one day I found the courage to run for office. I was the first South Asian American woman to ever run for United States Congress. And that experience of just losing terribly just changed my life and inspired me to start Girls Who Code and then now Moms First.
I love that in your book, you talk about failure. And I want you to dig a little bit into the nitty and gritty, because I think people really need to hear that. And especially a lot of our listeners are women of color in different places and spaces right now. And I just want to read what you say about failure in your book. You can get it, Brave, Not Perfect. That is me, not Can TV saying that. So you will falter, you will make mistakes, you will have setbacks, flops, and failures. And yet each time you screw up, you learn what not to do. Each time you falter, you prove that you can right yourself. Each time you fail, you get to try again. ultimately, your failures give you your edge. They make you stronger, wiser, more empathetic, more valuable, more real. And when you stop demanding perfection for yourself, they become your personal bravery badges of honor. Wear them with pride and then get back out there and do it all over again. So I'd love to dig in about what did it feel like? Spiritually, emotionally, where were you? And then what were some of the tools and tips and techniques that you could give our audience members, how you got out of it?
I mean, when I lost that first race, I was devastated. As you know, you can appreciate this. Like, I thought I was going to win. I didn't even have a concession speech in my bag. I was broke. I hadn't worked, for 11 months so I could, run for office. I was humiliated. We had a pretty high profile election, so everybody knew that I lost, and I had pissed off the Democratic establishment. And so, the next day was really hard. And part of what I learned though in that race though is that failure doesn't break you. And in many ways, when I woke up the next week, yes, I was devastated. Yes, I was upset. Yes, I was crying, but I was also not broken. And I think for so long, I thought in my life that if I failed at something and it didn't work out, that it would literally break me. So I wouldn't even bother to try. And so that moment of failure was also very clarifying, because it made me think about what are all the other things that I had talked myself out of that I should do, because failure doesn't break you. It actually makes you stronger. It gives you knowledge, like I talk about it in the book, but you do have to have hacks on failure. So one of the most important hacks that I have is I give myself a specific amount of time to grieve, to go over what went wrong, to talk about what I would do over again, to drink a lot of margaritas and talk to my husband, right, about like what I shoulda, couldas. And then I move on. I don't rethink it. I don't replay it. I don't, regret it. I move on. And so I think when we give ourselves periods to go through that mourning, but then say, we're done, we're going to move on, it doesn't break you. I also really, it's funny now as I've gotten older, I've learned that failure is actually a privilege. It's a gift. And it's often a privilege for men, not for women, especially not women of color. And, you think about Silicon Valley, they don't even fund startups unless they failed a couple of times, right? That shows you that you know how to do it and that you gain some knowledge and some experience that you can then take into this next iteration and this next iteration. And, I think about Serena Williams, who I'm obsessed with. And she, lives at the edge of her ability, and a coach who says, do it again, do it again, do it again. We always hear about LeBron James and, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, how they would just sit and shoot the basketball over and over and over again. And that all their misses led to their wins. And so we have to see failure as, a way to actually become great. And I think the thing is that we all want to be great, but in order to be great, you have to learn how to fail.
I love that. And I often say to people, failure isn't fatal and success has to be sustained. And in your book, and in a lot of what you talk about and share with others, Reshma, you talk about bravery and courage. Help us understand bravery and what courage is, because bravery doesn't mean running into traffic and not paying attention, right? No. Courage doesn't mean looking for ways to pump up your ego. Delineate that for us, for our listeners, so we can know that it's a process and that there is a way to approach bravery and courage.
Yeah, so, the way that I approach bravery in my book was as the antidote to perfection, right? And the story that I tell is about how the students in my class, when they're learning how to code for the first time, they don't know how to code, they'll call a teacher over and they'll say, I don't know what code to write. And the teacher will look at her screen and she'll see a blank text editor. But if she presses undo a few times, she saw that her student actually wrote code and then deleted it. Mm-hmm. So instead of showing the progress that she made, she'd rather show nothing at all. We all can relate with that, right? It's this idea of like we've learned from the time we're little girls to just give up before we even try. And so we don't build that muscle. And in many ways, perfectionism is what is really holding us back. It's holding us back from, becoming the majority in Congress and Washington and all the governor seats, right? In entrepreneurship. And so the antidote to perfectionism, I think, is bravery. And when I talk about bravery, I don't mean like saving a baby from a burning building. I actually don't even mean running for office. I mean the bravery when you're walking down the street and someone bumps into you and you don't say, I'm sorry. I mean the bravery when you're sitting in a meeting and it's time to ask questions. and you just shoot your hand all up in the air without knowing exactly what you want to say because you're afraid that you're not going to sound smart. I mean, the bravery to take that one step to start your podcast or to send that email, making that ask. It's these bravery in these small moments that help prepare us for the bravery in the big moment.
I love it. And bravery to ask for what you want.
Yes.
Getting rid of that judgment. Yeah, I love that.
To ask for what you want and to tell people how they may have made you feel. Like I was on the airplane the other day with my 3-year-old, and we had just found out that our dog of 13 years has cancer and doesn't have very long to live. And I'm, on the plane, I had to get to its beach actually in Chicago. And
well, next time you're here, we got to have lunch.
I will, for sure. It was a quick trip. But, I'm texting my husband to figure out kind of whether the doctor called about Stanley. And my 3-year-old's super friendly, So he's like looking through the seats, right? Being like, hi, what's your name? And the guy behind him basically tells him to shut up. Now, I'm kind of like on my phone, not exactly hearing, and the plane's about to take off. Now, I'm a mama bear, right? And I was like, oh, no, you did not. And I'm about to, and if I do, this plane's not going to take off, right? So I just let it go for the moment, for the ride, right? And then when the plane lands, I turn around and I look at him and I say, did you yell at my son? And everyone's just kind of staring at me, right? And he said, I did. I was trying to sleep. You should, basically, you should, take care of your kid, right? And I was like, the next time you want to talk to, my son, talk to his mom, right? And we had this engagement. But the point is that in my old Reshma would have said nothing, got in the car with my dad and been like, oh my God, can you believe this happened to me? And I would have just simmered and I would have just filled with all the one-liners I should have said, right? And it's that regret that we have of not speaking our truth, of not standing up for ourselves. That's the thing that eats us up inside. And when we're able to release and say what we think, speak out against that microaggression, we are then free. Absolutely. And it's that freedom that we need to, I think in many ways, reach our fullest potential. It is that ability to just raise our hand in a meeting and say what we think and feel like comfortable doing that.
It's so important. Bravery. Yeah. And what you give, because I've made it a purpose and an intention in my life to help women with that. How do you respond to exactly what you're talking about? And what are the words that they can say that feel good for them? One of the tips that I often give to women is to say, are you okay? When people say ridiculous things.
I love that.
Right? Are you okay? It takes the onus off me and to ask you, are you okay?
Well, that's why we started this podcast, because Connie she was like a mentor. Now she's a ventor, a sister. And still, my mom talks about this. My mom, I won't say her age, but she even struggles with this too. It's not, you start so young, ingraining this into young girls' minds, to be perfect, to not speak your truth, to not say too much, not to offend. And then we get, where my mom is her age, where she's unlearning things. And so I think it's so important. That's why I'm soaking all this up.
Well,
everything you two say.
Anna, though, the reason we do this is intergenerational. We are learning from each other, all of us. And the only way we can help the world, the country, get to a place where all of us feel that we don't have to be perfect is to do exactly what we're doing today, bravely, Reshma, which is what you are teaching us.
Joining me on the next edition of In the Arena, the joy-filled leader, Dory McWhorter. Take a look.
Fundamentally, when the work is good, that's problem solved. Right now, it's about how do we bring the right resources to the work, how do we create the right structure and the culture around the work to actually get the work done.
Join the conversation Tuesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19 and streaming on cantv.org and the new CAN TV Plus app.
I think as a woman of color, I think for all of us, our mothers in many ways taught us to shrink ourselves or not call attention because they didn't want us to feel disappointment.
Yes, the disappointment they had. If my mom was born in the generation that I am in right now, my mom would be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Like, she is that amazing and strong and brave and intelligent, but she didn't have the opportunities or the mentors to give her the confidence and she thought all she needed to do is get married, have a family, and that was it for herself. And I love seeing her now expand, even at her age, and she's rewiring like Connie. And so that's what I really love this conversation. Now, I know we're running out of time, but I want to hit, Connie has some things on imposter syndrome that we got to get to.
Reshma, so anyone who hasn't should watch your commencement address at Smith College. I was the A Woman Corner as I listened to it and listened to it twice, where you talked about imposter syndrome. We hear so much about that. Will you please have the drop the mic moment on how we can stop talking about the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome, it's a strategy to impede women's progress. And we often put these words like in medical terms. So we think like it's a condition, right? When in reality, it is not. Like imposter syndrome was originally called imposter phenomenon. And it was kind of introduced by two researchers to kind of basically talk about high achieving white ladies. And the term was then turned into syndrome. And that happened during the 1970s when Title IX became law and women started entering college. And when Roe v. Wade was decided, now that we had control over our bodies, we could enter the workforce in droves. And so imposter syndrome was a way to impede that progress. And if you look in history, and the example I gave was about bicycle face and how there's this, again, it was a term that was used to prevent women from wanting to ride their bicycles because bicycles were being used in the suffrage movement to have women go from town to town and get our right to vote. And so, oftentimes these terms are just, they come up and we need to see them as what they are, which are schemes and strategies to impede our progress and to impede women's progress. And I think that this is very, it's interesting that we're talking about this. I'm working on I was thinking through a piece actually right now, even about what's happening with affirmative action.
Yes.
The demise of affirmative action and how some of the conversation is about, well, from Clarence Thomas, right? Which is like, well, this isn't good because when I got to Yale Law School, I wanted to feel like I was there on my own and not, you know what I mean? And not
Which
because
he wasn't,
somebody
let's be clear.
Leg up. And it's almost like you're using imposter syndrome to justify not dismantling racism. Mm-hmm. And so we got to see all of another example, like I give of this, is the gender pay gap, right? Yes. Instead of, creating an algorithm to get rid of unequal pay in every single company that like literally any one of my girls who code could create for them in 1 minute. Instead, we tell women, well, you got to ask for more. One by one, each of us got to know our worth, play our negotiation, ask for more. And if you treat it as an individual inadequacy problem and not a structural issue, we're never going to get to change. Precisely. And now the older I've gotten and all the work that I'm focused on is structural change. And I now see it everywhere, right? Where they try, whether you're a person of color, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, whether you're a woman, right? They try to make you feel like something's wrong with you. Exactly. When nothing's wrong with you, we're good. The system is set up against us. And what we need to do is dismantle the system.
And the bravery it takes to call a thing, just as you did. There is nothing wrong with us that needs to be fixed. We don't need to build a better woman or a better person of color. What we need to do is understand the systemic and structural issues, and we don't have to own that. I spent a lot of my career doing this work, Reshma, and you're right. It's exhausting when I'm continually trying to convince the people who have power that people who look like me belong here.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, nobody let us in. We have to be twice as smart. Twice as good.
Exactly.
And what we haven't, affirmative action is really about not talking about unearned white privilege.
That's it.
That's what we have to dismantle.
That's it.
And we've never, part of it is, I think also, and I'll say this for my own self, right? It's like I hadn't been focused on the structural change. I did buy into the lie that I could just lean in a little harder, go off my way to the top, color code my calendar. That the problem was me.
So true.
It's never been me, right? It's never, ever been me.
The systems weren't created for people like us anyway. And so therefore, me changing myself is only going to harm me, physically, emotionally, and otherwise.
I would love for you to tell our audience about what you're doing at Moms First as well on all of this work you're tackling to dismantle the structure. And we are there to support, and we are ready to march and vote, which is so important, do everything we need to do. But really, we just heard from Congresswoman Presley this week at an event that she was talking about who is in the room making those policy changes. And if you elect the right people at the table, which people like us haven't been at for so many decades, you can actually make those structural changes. So we'd love to hear about Moms First and how people can get involved listening and how to follow you and know what's going on.
Yeah, well, Moms First is now a grassroots movement of over 1 million moms and allies, and we're working to transform our workplaces, our culture, and our government. So if you think about the average girl that's born in America, right? She's born 72, she's probably the valedictorian of her class. 72% of high school valedictorians are women. She graduates at the top of her class in college. The vast majority of those that are getting their bachelor's degrees in college are women. And she probably gets highly recruited to work at a Google or a Microsoft, right? Because most of those incoming classes, again, are now women. And then she becomes a mother. And, 86% of women by the time they're 44 will become a mother. And the minute that life event happens, everything changes. All of a sudden you live in a country, the only industrialized nation that doesn't provide paid leave. 90% of low-income women go back to work one day after having a baby. We live in a country that doesn't have affordable childcare. 40% of parents are in debt because of childcare. As you can probably hear my son screaming in the background because we don't have childcare. And most women work to work. And then you talk about pay. When moms make 58 cents on every dollar. And I'm not even talking about Black mothers, right? Exactly. 70% of Black mothers are both a single caregiver and a single income earner, right? Exactly. So we have these conversations about we got to get to equality. We're in a false race that we're never going to win. Mm-hmm. Because again, we keep saying the solution is getting more mentors and sponsors and, basically helping women negotiate. When the real reality is we got to get paid leave. We got to get affordable childcare. We got to have every company subsidize childcare. The government has to pass this legislation. We have to start paying people equally, right? You need structural change. That is what is going to get us to equality. And to me, and you also do this by always building towards the most vulnerable. When I built Girls Who Code, I went to refugee camps and I went to the most poorest communities in the world. And I said, if I could teach a girl that doesn't have a computer, that doesn't have Wi-Fi, I can teach anybody. And now 10 years later, we taught 600,000 girls. Half of them are under the poverty line and are Black and brown.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
Similarly here, we got to build workplaces for single women, single moms of color.
Yes.
Because we can design for her and she can not just survive, but thrive. Everybody will.
And I
but
think
instead,
what you're
we
saying
built them
also,
for the most
though,
powerful.
in terms of cultural specificity, Reshma, each of those groups have their own culturally specific needs, and we want to be inclusive in that way, right? Because equality means we all start from the same place. Equity means we get what we need to get there. So we want equality, and that needs to morph into equity.
And I want to add, too, a lot of the times women of color are not only taking care of toddlers, like my 3-year-old, but a lot of times our parents, too. So not only are we have young children, we have caregivers. And we're in that sandwich generation where we are taking both. And if we're not getting paid what we are as a man, and we don't have the structural change, we will not survive. And we will just be underwater constantly and exhausted constantly. And there's not enough self-care in the world that will help you.
Yeah, and then we don't reach our fullest potential. And we have depression, anxiety, heart attacks. It's huge consequences both for health and for kind of our financial potential. And I think part of the problem with trying to change at Moms First is we've all made this seem like this is your personal problem. Mm-hmm. This is your personal failure, when it's not. It's again, a structural issue. Exactly. Child care is an economic issue. You can't work if you don't have care, period. So I'm so excited about the work that we're doing at Moms First and about the potential of what we're going to change and the impact that it's actually going to have on women.
We are going to close right now with our tips and techniques that we do every segment. So every time we end with just one tip or technique. And I would love to ask you, Reshma, if you could give us one tip or technique you could leave us with, what would it be?
I would say search out failure. Try one thing that you don't think that you can do and just do it. And see what happens. And see even how you feel if it doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. And how you work through that failure, and then you'll do it again and again and again. It's almost like we talked about, the first time you stick up for yourself, you're like, you'll always stick up for yourself. It will unlock something in you, and that's how failure is.
Thank you for being here today. We wish you all the best. Stay in touch, and thank you for being a true sister with all of us.
Thank you, Reshma.
Congratulations. Thank you.
So we are
Bye.
going to go to Connie for our last segment of our episode about saying less is saying more. And Connie, what do you got for us? Because it's been an inspirational conversation.
Well, it's been an inspirational conversation, and I'm always so inspired and when I learn something. But I'm a voracious reader, as many people know, and one of the things that I have read, it was about the active imagination, and something that was written by one of my favorite authors, who said the following: "The active imagination is bound up in memory. They straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding, it is remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that, remembering where we were. So I encourage each of us to remember that we are good enough, we are enough, that we don't have to be perfect, that we can be brave and courageous, standing up for ourselves and others. So in saying less, I wish you bravery and courage and a village that supports the I'm possible in you."
Connie, you every time get me every time. And I just, as we end this episode, and I'm a little emotional already, but this has been one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. It has ignited a joy in me and a fire in me that I had forgotten last year after my big failure. And so I am just in awe of you, and I want to thank you and our listeners and our family and our friends and our executive producer, DeShawn, who's amazing, for doing this journey of joy and helping me reclaim my joy and helping me push me to take those big risks.
Well, I want to thank you for helping this very introverted person break through to joy.
Which
in
no
this.
one knows,
Which
but they now
most
know.
people- exactly. I think your mom has the best definition of introversion and extroversion. But thank you for helping me break through to this moment. It was something that I thought about, and you said, let's go do this. Let's break the eggs and make the omelet. So I honor you for your open, teachable spirit, for the joy that you bring in everything that you do. And I look forward to our continual breakthroughs together.
Me too. Well, thank you so much. And if you missed any of our episodes, you can catch us on CAN TV at Plus on YouTube. This is Joy in the Breakthrough, and our last episode. We wish you well, be brave, and reclaim your joy.
Our last episode of this season.
Yes,
So
stay tuned.
Thank you all. Stay tuned.